Okay. So there it is. We're recording now. Welcome everyone to this is the second class in a series that of webinars that MOFGA is hosting this spring called Gardening and Climate Change. This one with a focus on veggie and fruit crops. And coincidentally, I didn't realize this at the time, but we timed it for the spring equinox. So that is exciting. I hope everyone is feeling the spring coming on and feeling ready to get in the garden and excited to learn today about how you can adapt your gardens to the changing climate. Um, so with us today are Meg Mitchell, who does our climate smart programming at MOFGA, and CJ Walke, who is our orchard manager at MOFGA. Meg is going to start us off with a presentation, followed by CJ. And then we'll have time for questions and answers for Q&A at the end. Please feel free to type questions in the chat as they come up. With any clarifying questions, I'll pose that in the moment. Otherwise, know that I will be saving your question for that end section of the Q&A. And I see one question in the chat right now. The first class was recorded. I'll drop the link to the recording in the chat shortly. Yeah, and then once we get to the Q&A, you're also very welcome to unmute yourself. Also share your experiences of gardening and climate change at that point. Without further ado, Meg, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to share your screen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meg Mitchell. I work in MOFGA's Farmer Programs team as the Climate Smart and Organic Transition Specialist. Not a huge fan of titles. I don't feel like that really encompasses me, but yeah, basically I support farmers making climate adaptation plans, as well as provide programming for folks who are transitioning to organic. So my background is mostly in commercial organic veggie production. And so I've been actually the past year transitioning, as I took this job at MOFGA, into more of a gardener. And so I really enjoyed putting this presentation together and kind of like reframing some of these like larger scale agricultural practices into like a gardening frame of mind. So yeah, glad to be here. And we were chatting about this a little earlier, but any clarifying questions, please put them in the chat and Maddie will interrupt and we can clarify. And then anything that's like more in depth or off topic, feel free to save those for later. All right, I'm going to share my screen. How's that look? Can everyone see that?
Looks great.
Okay, cool. Curious, Maddie, can you see my Zoom window or just the screen?
Just the screen.
Okay, awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, looking forward to this topic. I just want to first acknowledge that this is like kind of an emotionally heavy topic that like I feel like the past 10, 15 years has transformed from somewhat of an existential threat to an immediate threat. And I feel like one of the most viable ways we can have resilience and resist these threats is by like community engagement and yeah, like community sufficiency. Yeah. So this is a process that we use for farms for adapting to climate change. And I think it's a really valuable tool that could be used on a smaller scale in a garden as well. And it's basically a type of whole systems planning where the first part of the process is trying to define your own goals. So are you doing this for fun? Are you trying to supply your family with food? Are you wanting to support low-income food access through give and take tables? Are you wanting to create insect habitat? What are your goals, whether they're concrete or even like personal goals of like, I want to learn how to do pollinator species, or yeah, like create a more sustainable relationship with the land. Basically, any planning process for climate adaptation should start with like defining what are your personal goals and kind of like what is the why of why you're engaging with growing food. Um, and yeah, for me, when I did this planning process for my farm, I feel like it gave me a place to channel my anxiety around the topic. And, instead of like as the wind blew, raging 50-mile-an-hour winds and like greenhouse plastic flapping, I could be like, okay, well, I have a plan. I know that this is one of my risks, is like high winds, and I have a plan to address it. So I feel like this is just a way you can take action and have some agency over your experience. And that kind of leads to the next part of the planning process, which is climate impacts. So trying to define, in Maine, I know you guys have reviewed this in the first session of like some of the conditions that Maine is facing, but we're challenged with both drought and heavy precipitation and high winds. And those are the three kind of like big climate impacts we're facing in our state. Um, and it's going to be individual site to site. What are the actual risks associated with those impacts? So it could be high winds. You have a high tunnel or a greenhouse. It could be drought. And so you need to make it your irrigation plan. Um, Flooding could be an issue, which would lead to erosion. So there's all types of risks out there. And so I feel like having that clear definition of what are the impacts you're facing and what are the risks because of those impacts. And then kind of my favorite part of the planning process is developing pathways to adaptation. And so we'll review several of the practices that you can use to create an adaptive pathway to dealing with some of those risks. A lot of those practices would be like pretty simple: cover cropping, hedgerows, um, water sinks. Yeah, I think it'd be cool later to find out, like, if you even want to just pop in the chat, what are some of the climate impacts and risks that you're facing on your farm? That'd be cool to kind of incorporate into our conversation as well. Um, yeah. And so I think, in the summer things get busy. If you have a weedy garden, that's kind of like can take up a lot of your time. So I find the best planning time is directly after the season. So maybe after you've put your garden to bed, you can kind of like go through while everything is still fresh in your mind from the season of like, what did you really struggle with? What felt stressful? And like, what are some ways you can address those stressors? And then I put this here. I'm assuming Maddie, you'll probably share these presentations or it'll be recorded. These are some really cool toolkits that can walk you through how you can go about this planning process in kind of like a structured way. I would say the American Farmland Trust Climate Adaptation Planning Workbook is like really user friendly and could generate some amazing ideas just in like a quick brainstormy type of way. Um, there's these really amazing tools, which I think I'd like to go into at least like the Maine Farmland Trust Climate Impact Assessment Tool, which is made for farmers. Does somebody want to pop their address into the chat and I can show you how this works?
In lieu of an address, Meg, maybe we can do MOFGA's address,
Okay, good
294
point.
Crosby Brook Road.
Sorry, what is it?
294 Crosby, Crosby Brook Road.
Good call, Maddie. Oops, I don't know if I did the right. Let's make this big. Okay, so this is MOFGA's headquarters right here. And I'll just, instead of drawing a field boundary, um, mm, There we go. Okay, and so basically you can do this with any property. Um, and this is a good way to kind of like get a generalized idea of like your climate impacts between now and 2099. Okay, so basically this is great. You want a um, so this kind of gives you a regional assessment. So this will show you what is your average annual temperature change between now and 2100. Um, and it shows you kind of like the percent of change is greater than 35.9% of other locations statewide. It looks like precipitation is going to be a big factor for MOFGA's climate future. 20% change in growing degree days. Um, and so like another thing to look for as you're doing this risk assessment is like what might be some opportunities here. And so this growing degree days might give you idea of like what are some, might you start looking at other crops that might be better suited for this type of climate. Another thing is like when you're thinking of, okay, well, it's gonna be a lot warmer, so maybe we need to plan for having additional ventilation if you have a greenhouse, or maybe like having shade cloth on hand. This is just kind of like gives you an idea of what to expect. Um, yeah, so 0% of the property is at a floodplain risk. That's great. Um, I live in Belfast, and so I have a very different report card. But it's just kind of like a cool way to assess what might be going on. Okay, now I'm gonna get back to my presentation.
Meg, there is one question that I'll ask as a clarifying question. Would drought be portrayed in the same way, I think, as the floodplains there?
That's a good question. I don't think that is kind of like addressed in this scorecard. It does have like the precipitation increase, but what I feel like that doesn't account for is like the swings in participation. So whether you have, um, even though you might have a 7.5% increase in annual precipitation, that could be coupled with years of drought as well. So it's kind of like the factor in climate change that you're dealing with is like the extreme changes. So I don't think this shows drought. Okay. Is this still big, Maddie? Okay, cool. And then Cornell's Climate Smart Farming Tools is like a more dialed in version of these same impact assessment. So that'll tell you there's a tool that's like how many days above 90 degrees should you expect, and kind of more like trends between now and 2100. So that's pretty cool. Um, yeah, so as I was talking about, this is the developing goals. So this is the first step of the project. I feel like personally, my goals always tend towards like supporting the health and well-being of everybody involved, whether it's the soil, my family, my neighbors, crops, wildlife. Um, yeah, and the stressors that we face and the associated risks are those high winds, drought, too much rain, crop and infrastructure loss, and erosion. And here's kind of like a spreadsheet of like how you can map that out in your mind of, what are the on-farm impacts and what is kind of like the consequences of those impacts. And so, yeah, the like identifying, I've been trying to shift away from using the phrase solution because climate change is not going to have a solution. We're going to have pathways to adapt to it, but there's not going to be like one answer that's going to solve all our problems. Um, yeah, and so I feel like something that's been really effective with the growers that I've worked with is soil moisture monitoring. So whether you can do this by hand, just like go out and assess your soil um, moisture just by like the ribbon test. So like squeezing the soil and filtering it through your fingers and like seeing how clumpy it is. And basically instead of just having your irrigation system on on a timer, like doing a more dialed in approach. Um, a lot of people are really getting into reduced and no tillage growing. Um, a lot more tarping instead of where in the past people would just rototill to kind of like kill back any weeds. Instead, people are shifting to like more soil coverage. Um, Reinforcing infrastructure, shade cloth is becoming a huge element to like having a successful stress-free garden, and greenhouse ventilation. I think I'll just go into these practices for um, adaptation that have like multi-purpose benefits. And the first one is hedgerow planting, which can be done on this scale. Europe is like the land of hedgerows, and it's a really beautiful thing to see these big fields broken up by hedgerows. But this could even be something that's like 10 feet long and not a huge expense. Willows make great hedgerows. It can be done with crops that have, or species that have like multi benefits, whether they're beneficial insects or, crops you can harvest off of. If they're conifers, then you can use them for tips for wreath making. Berries, brambles all make really good hedgerows, which keep the soil in place. They're really good at kind of like moderating the water levels. So if you think about water, whether you're dealing with drought or flood, having established perennial species are going to help in dry years, basically keep moisture in the soil. And in wet years, they're going to be able to suck up a lot of that moisture. So it's a strategy that kind of like serves both ends of the extreme spectrum as far as like precipitation goes. They also make amazing windbreaks. So with that high wind component to the impacts that we're facing, the height of a hedgerow can protect 10 times the distance. So if you have, like if you're facing nor'easters, then, say you have a 15-foot hedgerow, that's going to provide 150 feet of protection for your garden. And so that can keep the soil from drying out, from heavy winds, keep erosion in check. And it's an amazing biomass storage as well. Um, yeah. And obviously in your garden, your hedgerows won't be this enormous, but this concept can be scaled down to any size. Oop. Um, one sec. Sorry, one sec. Okay, so yeah, I'm sure CJ is going to go into a little bit of site prep, but basically you want to make sure that your conditions are right for the species you're selecting. And you want to have some woody and perennial species. Evergreens are really great since they provide winter wind protection as well. And where you're disturbing ground to plant, mulch is always a good idea. You're going to want to irrigate them after you plant, and provide protection from browsing wildlife. And this is what it can look like. And for site prep, people are doing a lot of mulching. I think an industry standard is a chemical treatment to kill back the existing vegetation. But of course, this is MOFGA, so we're not going to recommend that. But either like tillage or tarping can work really well to kill back, like if you have existing sod there. And this seems like a really simple strategy that probably a lot of you are already implementing in your gardens, but can make a huge difference in water retention and, erosion control and like reducing your fertility needs. So yeah, cover crop is a gorgeous thing, especially when those like if you see a bare garden over the winter, you can see that just get like hammered by winter rains, which we're getting a lot more of instead of like the protective snow cover, a lot of like winter rains, which can actually do a a lot of damage and compaction. And they can be really beautiful as well. And so kind of like the scale that we'd be working on in our gardens is either broadcasting by hand or with a belly mounted spreader, and then raked in. Some crops like clover and small seeded crops can be frost seeded. So you would, when we're in a freeze thaw cycle, like maybe a week ago, like at maple time, you can just spread small seeded cover crops on top of the ground and they get incorporated just by that freeze thaw cycle. Here's a really beautiful crop of underseeded clover. So, you know, a, a great, sometimes I feel like with those late season crops, it's hard to get a cover crop on. But what you can do is as your crop is maturing, like at the last time you weed them for the year, you can throw down some cover crop seed and rake it in. And even if you're harvesting late into October, early November, you can still have nice ground cover over the winter. There's, yeah, I feel like when you define your goals, that's going to help you steward you through this entire process. So trying to figure out what cover crops to plant will involve like, what are you looking to accomplish with these cover crops? Um, Part of with the increased participation or increased precipitation, one thing that we're dealing with a lot is flooding. And one way to help out your um, garden with that is with tillage cover crops. So whether that's like yellow clover has a long taproot or tillage radish, um, there's a really there are biological ways to take care of some of those issues, just opening the ground up for water to penetrate and percolate. And grass is doing an amazing job of just holding onto the soil over the winter, and they really have an extended window that they can germinate in. So even like middle of October, early November, you can throw down some rye seed and it's not going to do as much as if you'd gotten it planted a month earlier, but it can still have a big effect of keeping the soil in place over the winter. And I'm sure you guys have all grown buckwheat, but it does an amazing job of just shading out all those annual weeds underneath it and provides amazing insect food. And depending on what cover crops you grow, there's different ways to terminate them. Winter kill would be like oats and peas and all those annual crops. Those you have the easiest time taking care of. Mowing and using a silage tarp for any of those cereal grains is a great way to take care of those in kind of like a low tech way. Yeah, and I think kind of like the overall message here is like plan on uncertainty. So I saw there was some questions ahead of time about like what are some like good dates to how are planting dates changing? And I think it's really instead of having concrete advice, it's more just like monitoring is the big take home lesson of keeping an eye on the weather and having materials on hand to deal with whatever swings might occur, whether it's a freeze in early June. Make sure you have those row cover, just way to protect your plants on hand, or late season, um, or like summer heat. You know, having some way to apply shade cloth is really important. Um, Eggplant, peppers, and tomatoes all are pretty sensitive above 90 degrees. They'll stop fruiting and even abort their blossoms. So like having some way to protect them from days above 90 is really important. And then thinking about like when I got into farming, um, the farms I was working on didn't even have irrigation. And now it's just like expect to irrigate. So make sure you have that in your plan. You know, when you're making your crop plan, also make an irrigation plan because um, if you don't plan on it, you will definitely need to irrigate. And then something that I feel like is kind of important in like this conversation is like continuing to find sources of joy And, maybe gardening is that for you. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this Venn diagram, but basically it's finding um, the overlap of what brings you joy, what work needs doing, and what are you good at. And gardening is like an amazing place in the center there that you can find like a really impactful way to benefit your community. Um, so I just wanted to share that with you as well. And let's see, I think that might be all I have. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Meg. And thanks for leaving us on a cheerful note to bring us back to the joy of gardening, even amidst the sort of like uh draw that many of us are feeling to have all the tools in our toolbox. One of the most important drivers for us is the joy of doing it in the first place. Uh, CJ, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Maddie. Um, Let me get rid of all the little windows everywhere. And that should be up and we should be good to go. Okay, hi everyone. I'm CJ Walke. I'm MOFGA's Orchard Program Manager, and I'll talk a little bit here tonight about some changes that I feel like I've seen over the years and expectations along the way, and some of the things that we're trying to implement here in the MOFGA orchards and make them translatable to folks with tree fruit at home, as well as some berries. So um, this is a plum blossom that's here in the front page or the front slide in the picture. And I only put it up there because maybe in 6 weeks we'll be seeing lots of these as we get into spring and early bloom with the plum crops. So a lot of when I think about it, climate adaptation, climate changing activities with the fruit trees, I tend to think a lot about, and Meg had mentioned it, I'm really concerned about water, which is usually too much or not enough. Heat has been an issue, and Meg mentioned wind, which is definitely a challenge with some of the younger trees and loads and fruit loads on established trees. But usually, water and heat, I feel like in recent years have been real challenges. So if you're thinking about planting out new trees, we always think about the location, and then just think about your water needs along the way, as well as what is the situation in the soil you have. So in general, stone fruit being like our plums, peaches, and cherries, maybe apricots are in the future. But stone fruit tend to prefer things to be a little more high and dry. They really don't like to have wet feet, and wet feet just meaning wet roots in really wet soil. So apples in general don't really want it to be too dry, but they also don't want it to be too wet, kind of somewhere in the middle. But in general, pears can handle heavier soils. And so by a heavier soil, I mean maybe more of a silty soil than say like a sandy loam. So apples tend to do pretty well on the sandy loams that are well drained as long as you can irrigate along the way. In the early years as they get established, I have seen pears kind of struggle in a similar sandy loam soil that apples are doing okay in, and vice versa. We're here at MOFGA, especially out in the Maine Heritage Orchard. We have a lot of or we have a section of some heavy silt, and the pear trees are doing just fine, and the apples are struggling. And I think that's just basically the situation in the ground. So just thinking about those locations. Another piece is thinking about orientation, kind of typical recommendations historically have been planting on a south slope to maximize that sun exposure. But as weather patterns are changing, things are warming up earlier, and then maybe cold snaps coming back in. People are starting to think about and plant on more of a north slope. So trying to delay that bud break a little bit longer, rather than trying to get them to break bud earlier, just trying to delay that and kind of delay, postpone that phenological development of the plants, flowers along the way in the early spring to try to avoid potential freezes during bloom time. So a little bit of a shift there. And then in general, slopes are a good location because they tend to be well drained with water in the soil as well as airflow. And oops, sorry about that. And then this, so this slide just thinking about location. This is a photo from my home nursery. I live in Swanville, which is, mid-coast, just inland from Belfast. A couple pictures from last March, early March, the date's there at the bottom. So the picture on the left, we got about 2.5 inches of rain that day. I went out for a walk in the evening before it was getting dark, had all this standing water on my soil. Next morning, went out to walk the dog, and all of that had kind of infiltrated through the soil and moved away. And soils that I'm working with here on this plot, they're a sandy loam, they're very well drained. So you can see just in kind of a 12-hour period, there was good, the water didn't run off like erosion wise, but it definitely worked its way back into the soil. Where if you have a much heavier soil, that might still be sitting there the morning after. So soils, I feel like for the fruit trees, and we were talking about perennial woody long-term crops, once they're where you put them, you're typically not going to move them. So just thinking about some of that prep work along the way and looking for good locations. And then just another piece in terms of thinking about water, too much, too little, is just to recognize that pretty much all of our fruit trees are grafted. So choosing a rootstock that's going to fit your situation is definitely key. But in terms of thinking about like managing water, too much, too little, droughts here and there, commercial, kind of a lot of the commercial orchard industry is growing on dwarfing rootstocks, which down here at the bottom, they require staking, they require irrigation, weed management, very labor intensive, but that's the production system we're seeing today. However, on a smaller scale, definitely home scale, home gardener scale, I would be recommending maybe seedling rootstocks, which are freestanding trees. You will need to water in young trees the first year or two for sure to get them established. But once they are, they should be strong enough and the root system's aggressive enough to find their own water. So seedling rootstocks, freestanding trees, don't need trellising. They tend to be very large. So those are the larger fruit trees that you see. But when you get into the semi-dwarf rootstocks, more manageable, smaller size trees, kind of in that middle range. But there are plenty of options with apple, far less with kind of pears and stone fruit, but still options to get kind of a smaller, more manageable size tree in your backyard, but one that is still freestanding, shouldn't require regular irrigation to find the water and help access the nutrients they need.
PJ, I just want to
Yep.
quickly ask for folks who don't know, like, what is the best way to find out what kind of rootstock a tree that you're looking at has?
Yeah, a good nursery will have it right on the label or right in their catalog. So that would be my recommendation, is like a nice local, smaller scale nursery that is growing the plants themselves or contracting with local growers to source those plants. If you go to, pretty soon, Rennie's and all the big box stores are going to have all sorts of Tractor Supplies, going to have all sorts of fruit trees for sale. Who knows where they're coming from? And oftentimes they don't really give you a good idea of what the root stock would be. In general, I would guess they're more of a semi-standard rough estimate or rough guess there. But if you're purchasing from a small scale local place, they are going to know what that root stock is. And there's plenty of resources out there to learn more about various root stocks. So I just didn't want to get into all the charts and the graphs that take up quite a lot of time. So, but just good to know there's different options along the way. Does that cover it, Maddie?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. And then, so just thinking about the trees, root systems, ability to capture water themselves, and then a few things to try to just manage the water in the soil around the trees, especially when they're younger. So, in that case, when there may not be enough water around, mulches are fantastic around young trees. These two pictures here. Picture on the right is a young tree, early summer, and just using some waste hay that's on the fairgrounds here. Hay bales left over from use at the fair, but just kind of thickly mounded up to try to suppress weeds, but also to retain moisture around that young tree. The picture on the left is actually a tree planted in a cover cropped strip that I had gone through with a weed whacker and just knocked down the cover crop before things were starting to set seed, and then just raked that fresh green material up into kind of a mulch ring around a tree that was planted earlier that spring. So mulches are great, have great benefits in terms of just trying to even out that water availability, moisture in the soil, ease some of that stress. I think they work really well. Whether it's fresh cut mulch, old hay material, wood chips, what you may have available, and can access anything to just kind of protect the moisture in the soil will be helpful. So a couple key points is notice that neither picture is the mulch right up against the tree. I like to keep that, keep nice bare soil around a young tree. I'll weed that quickly by hand or even just with like a little stirrup hoe, hula hoe or something, just to scratch up young weeds. But keeping the trunk free and clear is pretty important for a number of different reasons, pest management wise and tree health wise. So not mounding it up right against the young trees. And then in some cases with this thick mulch could be, as you get into fall, going into winter, could be attractive to voles, to meadow voles, which would want to come and try to chew on your young tree. So in some cases in the fall, I'll go around with a fork and just kind of spread that mulch out away from the tree itself, make it a little bit thinner. If like the picture on the right is pretty thick, I'll scratch it out, make it a little thinner, spread it out further around, just let that decompose over time to discourage vole habitat and other rodent issues that will want to chew on the young trees. And then irrigation, Meg talked about irrigation as well. I don't really have any good pictures or setups depending on what you're looking to grow, how you're looking to manage it. But in general, fruit trees, we think similar to like your home garden estimates of maybe an inch of rainfall equivalent for the trees each week. So when I plant out young trees, usually I'm watering like a 5-gallon bucket, probably once to 2 times a week, depending on the rain situation that we're receiving. So just to keep that in mind, and whether that's hauling buckets, garden hoses, drip irrigation, there's lots of options out there, just depending on what you're able to access and utilize in your home space. So to move away from the water piece and think a little bit more about the weather and the heat or lack thereof. When I mentioned before, different planting locations, trying to delay bud break, prolong dormancy, really what's key for all of our fruit trees that are flowering in the spring, they're all flowering essentially in May, early, mid, late May. And so we're trying to avoid that freeze event or cold snap that comes back in while the blossoms are just about to open or currently open on the various trees. Um, those spring freezes can kill blossoms. And if we have dead blossoms, then we have no fruit, and we're waiting a whole nother year to get fruit off of our trees. So on a commercial scale, and this is not really anything I would expect. I think there's only maybe one large orchard in Maine that I'm aware of, at least, that uses wind machines, but wind machines and heaters are very common out on the West Coast, where there's lots of fruit production, Washington, Oregon. So wind machines just trying to like move wind around. They look like massive windmills and prevent that cold air from settling into pockets in the orchard and doing damage. Also orchard heaters, trying to light fires, things like that, just to provide some extra heat to keep off that freezing edge away from the open fruit or the open flowers and the developing fruit when they're really vulnerable. And then also irrigation can be used, kind of like an overhead irrigation can be used to protect plant tissues, because as that water freezes from the liquid into ice, it actually is giving off a little bit of heat, and that ice can form around the leaves of a plant as long as this water is continuous and create like a protective shell around the plant itself and the leaves and protect the temperature from getting below zero. I think it kind of hovers around that freezing point, but doesn't dip enough to actually do damage during that cold snap. So getting that bit of protection is something you could do. I've seen it on vegetable farms when you're hardening off a bunch of seedlings out behind the greenhouse, and it's going to get down into the 20s running sprinklers all night long. It's a lot of use of water, makes quite an enormous mess. Everything ices over, but things survive. And kind of key there is to keep that water going through the morning until temperatures rise back up. Like hopefully the sun is out, things are warming. You can do damage if you shut that water off too soon, and then the freeze continues because deepens because the continuous water helps kind of manage that situation. So, and then here is a chart out of Michigan State. It's a pretty old chart, but everything is still pretty much current. And the link that's available, it extends through stone fruit. I think it's like 3 or 4 pages long, but kind of the key here is just to look at the different stages of bud development on fruit trees and the temperatures at which they're susceptible to different levels of bud or flower kill. So what kind of look at primarily here is on the apple side when we're getting into that kind of full pink first bloom, full bloom period, is temperatures at 28 degrees will kill roughly 10% of your fruit buds, which isn't really a big deal. That's okay. The trees have plenty. But when things dip down a few more degrees to 25 degrees, that's pretty much a guaranteed 90% kill of flowers and fruit buds. And that's essentially considered a crop loss. So trying to manage these kind of erratic situations during this critical time so that you don't lose flowers and lose fruit long term. And the numbers are relatively the same across different pears and stone fruit, maybe a couple of degrees kind of difference. But more or less, those are kind of like the critical 28 degrees, 25 degrees that you're hoping to avoid. And for us here in Unity, back in the spring of 2023, picture on the left here, afternoon of May 17th, I knew there was forecasted cold. I believe 28 is what I was thinking or expecting from weather forecasts for the following morning. So I went out, took a few photos of the trees. The trees were in bloom. This is an apple here on the left. It was in the 50s that afternoon. Early that morning, not when this picture was taken, but early that morning, temperatures got down to 24 on May 18th, and all of the open flowers on the apples, maybe some residual pears at that time, but all of the open flowers looked like this picture on the right. And we had pretty much, we had some random fruit here and there, some very distorted, ugly looking frost damaged fruit that made it to harvest at the end, but more or less considered 2023 to be a crop loss. And that occurred all across the Northeast, Maine into New York for sure. So on the other side, things getting too hot, managing heat is kind of a challenge for us because it's not really something that I would typically approach. The frost freezing issues, getting close to that mark. I feel like I've been around for the 15 plus years that I've been working with tree fruit. But these heat spikes that we're starting to see early, kind of like May and June, are starting to cause some problems for some of our work here at MOFGA. But in the bigger picture, managing heat, again, like kind of New York, West Coast, and the West Coast, where apple production is really centered for us in the US, managing heat and managing direct sunlight are constant things for orchards on a commercial side. So when we start to get hot temperatures coming in, you can use irrigation again for some evaporative cooling to try to keep the plants from getting too hot, cooking fruit, cooking leaves. Shade cloth, as Meg had mentioned, not very realistic or practical for a full tree, depending on the size, although you can do it with some labor. And then mulches just to try to retain the moisture in the soil, try not to dry out that soil so the roots are staying, or roots in the tree are getting enough moisture. The picture here is actual sunburn, just too much direct sunlight on fruit. This typically, it's starting to show here and there in Maine. I'm seeing reports out of it from Extension, but it's definitely a thing long-term, Washington and Oregon growing fruit. And usually they are applying some type of kale and clay type of spray, like the surround product, like a white clay product to reflect some of that heat and reduce some of that sunlight that's impacting the fruit. So, and then another piece when we get into this managing heat is that high temperatures can really affect pollen production and viability. Meg had just mentioned that with peppers, I believe. The nightshade family. I think there's been enough research with vegetables, and there really hasn't been so much pollen viability research around tree fruit. I've asked this question because it hasn't been so much of an issue of high heat during bloom when we're looking for flowers to get pollinated. But I believe, pollen production and viability, when you start to get above 90, even in our tree fruit crops, there's either reduced production or the pollen isn't viable, and pollination of flowers is just not going to occur at those higher temperatures. And for some of the examples there, we can just look back at the past 2 years. Back on that May 18th, it was 24 degrees that morning. 10 days later, we were at 92 for a day. A couple days, I think we're right around that temperature. And then June 1st, we hit 98 on the weather station nearby us here on the MOFGA grounds. And so June 1st was the highest temperature of the entire season. And that's when fruitlets are just starting to develop. Petal fall was probably just a week or so, 10 days prior to that. So young, susceptible, vulnerable fruit to these real extreme spikes. Last season, 2024, June 19th, we hit 99 degrees here. So these spikes in temperature, that was also the highest temperature of the season here at our location. So these temperature spikes are showing pretty early when things are extremely vulnerable. And then my little bit of text on the right side here is that the past two June spikes, we have definitely had our young grafted fruit trees in our small nursery just get cooked with that intense heat because the day before, day after, are excessively hot as well. I just put down the dates of these spikes. So we're preparing this year. How do we figure out a way to use hoops and shade cloth and be prepared to have that to put over the young trees so we don't lose trees, because it definitely cooked grafts and killed trees with these heat spikes. I'm a little concerned about using overhead irrigation to try to do the evaporative cooling piece, because we are dealing with increased prevalence of fire blight, which is coming up in a couple slides. And I am really focused on not doing anything that is going to encourage fire blight or other disease issues, because in organic systems, disease can be a real challenge, especially once it's established. Another piece I just wanted to mention was kind of like chilling hours for different fruit crops versus cold hardiness. Just in the past year, really this winter, I've been paying more attention to these chilling hours, which I'd never really thought too much or paid too close attention to in the past. So I kind of know enough to get myself in trouble. I'm not going to claim any type of expertise here because I'm still trying to figure out the numbers and all that. But essentially, chilling hours for fruit trees are just like I think it's like vernalization or cold snaps for other seeds to know that they need to be dormant for a certain amount of time. And then spring is coming as things warm up and they break dormancy, ready to germinate, trees ready to start breaking buds and growing again. So usually the accumulation of these chilling hours are in the range like between 35. Oh, that's a mistake. That should be 54. I'm sorry, but 35 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, and the hours just over the course of the day that the temperatures are in that range. The trees are starting to acclimate for winter, hardening off as those temperatures are kind of slowly dropping, getting closer into winter. So this is fall, getting into January. In general, apples and pears need about 1,000 to 1,200 hours. It varies with cultivar or variety. But in that range, peaches an average, at least the ones we grow in Maine, around 800 hours. So they're typically accumulating all these hours in early winter. And a peach tree could have its chilling hours satisfied by late January, depending on the year. And then if we were to get a nice, say, like January thaw or a real warm spell, get into the 50s, that starts to trigger the tree to think it's spring, can start to break dormancy a little bit, thinking about it. And then if we snap back down into single digits below zero, then you can start to get some real issues with that tree already trying to break dormancy back into cold snap of winter. And then we often get those fluctuations before the tree should really be breaking bud and flowering. So it may get warm again and cold again. And that's affecting tree not real hardiness, but at least bud survival, and fruit bud survival is really what we're focused on, because we're growing the trees mostly for their fruit. So chilling hours versus cold hardiness, like we can look at the USDA hardiness map here, figure out what your zone is when you're thinking about tree fruit. Chilling hours, hardiness are kind of two different things that we consider. So southern apples that might do just fine. Southeastern part of the country typically have lower chilling hours and they're met there. So they could be meeting those chilling hours sooner and then more susceptible to, say, like a January thaw, and thinking about they're not actually leafing out or breaking bud, but the systems of the tree are preparing for it and they get snapped back into winter. And then also when we think about the hardiness of things and ratings for plants, Highmore Farm here in Maine, the extension fruit and veg farm out in Monmouth, they're doing work with a lot of peaches and realizing that even though we know that a tree or a variety is hardy to our zone, there's also bud hardiness, so fruit bud hardiness, and there can be variations, if not considerable variations, between the two. So we can think of a certain crop. I'll just stick with the peaches. That's where a lot of the work is being done. We know that they can survive certain varieties, hardiness to our area, but maybe the cold gets down too cold that the fruit buds can't survive. So you lose fruit buds, but the tree still survives. So just different concerns when we get into the extremes and the fluctuations really are the biggest challenge. So then just the last couple slides, reviewing the questions that folks had sent in previously. Hopefully I've hit some of those questions, but some of them were about pest management. New things showing up on the scene. I think insect-wise, the life cycles of the things we have are maybe moving a little bit, shifting a little bit, but they all seem to be the same challenges that we've always had. There are other pests that are kind of making their way up, but currently right now what I'm seeing, we're just dealing with the same kind of similar troublemakers. But there's a couple diseases that we're definitely seeing far more prevalence of throughout the state and moving into the Northeast. So this Marsanina leaf blotch, I believe it's originally from the Asian continent. I think that's correct. First showed up in the Northeast. I believe it was in Pennsylvania in like 2017, transported on plant material coming from overseas. But it's a fungal disease, has a similar kind of infection period to apple scab, which is our primary fungal disease for apples. Marsanina is affecting apple trees. But even though the infection period is relatively the same, which primary infection period for both is like around that bloom time, so during May, but Marsanina doesn't really show up till maybe a month and a half, 45, 50 days later after that infection period, where scab you would see signs within a week or 10 days. So you start to see some of this mottling on the leaves, some of the damage. They start to get into this kind of yellowing of leaves. And what you're going to notice is that this tends to happen on the interior of the tree, lower parts of the branches, lower meaning closer, I mean closer to the trunk, not necessarily closer to the ground, but more towards the interior and starting to defoliate. And that can work its way as it spreads, kind of works its way out on the limbs, branches, and shoots, where in a really bad situation, you can have considerable defoliation in the heart of the tree, and the only green leaves that you have left are the 6 or 8 at the ends of every shoot on the outside. So this is becoming more and more common and definitely a challenge, and it falls into, for we organic growers, it falls into the category of managing fungal diseases. But it has just a little bit of a different life cycle and a little bit harder to manage. And some of the research over the past decade is showing that varieties that we would typically recommend folks look at as disease resistant, that have been developed over the years, over the past 75 to 100 years, to have some resistance to apple scab, those varieties seem to be more susceptible to Marsanina than ones that aren't bred for resistant to apple scab. Reason why, I don't know. Those are just things that I'm reading and hearing from folks that are looking at this. So a newer disease to be paying attention to. And then the last one here is, I don't want to say everybody's favorite or nightmare, but fire blight is a bacterial disease affecting primarily apples and pears. When I started work with MOFGA almost 20 years ago, working with a tree fruit 15 plus, it was something that we never saw. Heard about it out west, down south, but pretty much was never anything for backyard growers, smaller scale producers that seem to be showing up. Now I feel like it's something that everybody is dealing with and we need to be really aware. So it's another disease that's looking for primary infection to occur right around bloom time. Blossoms can get infected. They can get into the tree later in the season. Usually what we're going to notice on young shoots, like the picture on the right here, is they start to curl over as they're infected. The leaves will start to blacken. Looks like someone scorched it. That's where the name fire blight comes from. And that can spread. And on that picture, if you look kind of below that second leaf there, you can see a little bit of a dot, and that's just a little bit of that bacterial ooze. So the infections will put out this ooze, and then in the next rainfall, that splashes around. Maybe a bee crawls across it and flies to another tree and walks on another susceptible area, and it gets spread relatively easily. The picture on the left is a young tree that we had in the Heritage Orchard last summer. I think I took this picture, it was probably August, getting close to September. And just over the course of a couple days, things started to look a little weird. And kind of in the center there, lower part of the tree, you can see the brown leaves. There was just this canker forming on the trunk of the tree itself. And I immediately cut down that tree and dug out the roots and burned that tree to get rid of the disease. So fire blight for your fruit trees, apples and pears, is definitely something that we should all be looking out for, because unchecked, it will spread and it will kill trees with ease. So hopefully folks are a little bit aware of that, and hopefully you're not seeing this already, but there's just limited approaches in an organic system. Fire blight, that's where antibiotics are used in commercial production. Streptomycin is the antibiotic that is used in IPM orchards to keep this in check in early season. And if I remember correctly, when the NOP took over, the National Organic Program, the USDA took over the organic production rule in 2012, 2002. The only place that antibiotics were allowed in the original rule was for fire blight control in apples and pears, because it was such a situation out west. And that sunset, I believe, in 2014. And there are some newer and different products on the line to try to combat fire blight organically. But even in commercial IPM orchards that use streptomycin, there are now resistant strains of the fire blight pathogen all across the northern part of the country. Not so far here yet in Maine, but definitely some in New York and definitely out on the West Coast. So something that could be a real challenge, especially for organic home growers. So unfortunately, I didn't end on the positive note, but I found a couple crocus flowers yesterday, so I took a picture of them, and I thought that that would be a nice way to end my section of the presentation.
It's a great way to end.